Hello and welcome to Module 3, How to Think Like an Examiner and what you need to do to get a 7, 8 or a 9. This is probably the most important module of the whole course, so make sure you watch it and watch it again. We're going to learn about the 4 marking criteria that examiners use to mark your task 2 answer. Very important. We're going to break each of the 4 down into simple language. We're going to find out exactly what you need to do and what you shouldn't do to get a band 7, 8 or 9. And we're going to look at bad examples and good examples. So example paragraphs from students' answers that show that they got a 7, 8 or a 9, or paragraphs that got a band 5 or a band 6 and why they got them. So let's briefly look at what we did in the last module. We learned about the 5 different types of questions, and we learned how to break any question down into 3 parts and why this is important. If you didn't look at Module 2, go back and watch it. No cheating. So let's think like an examiner. This is extremely important. The only way to get a high score is to know how the exam is marked. The key to getting over a 7 is to give the examiner exactly what they want and nothing else. All of my teaching is based on this principle. I don't teach you anything unless it's what an examiner is judging you on. So that is the key to getting high scores, is to knowing what the examiner wants and giving it to them and nothing else. Don't worry if you don't understand everything in this module first time. We will be constantly referring back to everything in this module throughout the rest of the course. So from modules 4 right up until modules 12, we will be mentioning this module again and again because it is so important. So let's look at the official marking criteria. Here it is. Very, very complex, lots of information, and it's very vague. It's not very specific. So we don't want to look at that. We want to break everything down into simpler language. So that's what I'm going to do for you. Feel free, if you want, to go back, pause the video and read this after we look at everything in much more simpler language. So the 4 criteria are task response, coherence and cohesion, vocabulary, and for grammar. So each of these gets an equal amount of marks, 25% each. Let's look at what each of them mean. So this part of your essay, task response, answer the question being asked. Very, very important. Answer all parts of the question. Again, extremely important. Make your position, your opinion clear and support it with relevant, well-developed ideas. So here is task response. This is it in more complex language. You can pause the video and read this if you want, but we're going to break it down into simple do's and don'ts. So, answer the specific question being asked, not the general topic. Like we discussed in Module 2, we shouldn't answer the general topic. We should answer the specific question, and make sure your ideas are relevant to the specific question being asked and not the general topic. You have to fully address each part of the question. So for example, if you were given a problems and solutions essay, you would give an equal amount of time to problems and an equal amount of time to solutions. You wouldn't write 150 words on problems and then write only 25 to 50 words on solutions. You give them an equal amount of word count and an equal amount of time on them. State your opinion in the introduction, very, very important, and use the supporting paragraphs to support this opinion. So we're going to have a full lesson on introductions and supporting paragraphs, but I'll briefly explain what this means. It is very, very important that your opinion is clear throughout the whole essay. So you must state it in the introduction, even if it doesn't ask you explicitly for your opinion. Say it just asks you for what do you think the problems and solutions are, you should outline your problems and solutions in the introduction. So that means your opinion about that is clear. And then your supporting paragraphs should be linked to this opinion. You also need to reiterate which means just state again your opinion in the introduction. So that means your opinion is clear throughout the whole essay. If your opinion is not clear throughout the whole essay, you can only get a band 6. You can't get above a band 6 for task response. You need to develop your main ideas with explanations and examples. Again, extremely important. If you don't do this, you can't get above a band 6. So you shouldn't just state reasons or main ideas and then not explain what they mean or explain how they answer the question. You need to also support those ideas with relevant specific examples. So be as specific as possible. Don't state just general statements. The more specific you are, the more your ideas will be linked to the question, so you won't talk generally about the topic. So let's look at what you should not do. Shouldn't spend lots of time on just one part of the question. Like I said before, you need to give equal time to each part of the question. Say you get an advantages and disadvantages question and you write 3 advantages and 150 to 200 words, and it's an amazing paragraph. And then you only write 1 disadvantage and it's only 30 words or 50 words. You can only get a band 6 for that. Because you haven't give equal attention to both parts of the question. You shouldn't give very general examples. You shouldn't give very general examples because the more specific you are, the more things are linked to the question. Also, if you give very general examples, you are not supporting your main ideas, because the more specific things are, the more authority they have and the more academic they are. For both general training and for academic, you need to make specific examples, and we'll be looking at how to make your examples more specific in a later module. You should never ever leave your opinion until the last sentence. This is very bad advice, and it's also common advice amongst many IELTS teachers. Like I said before, your opinion needs to be very, very clear throughout the whole essay. If you don't mention your opinion until the last sentence, it's like a surprise opinion. The examiner will be reading your essay thinking, what is this? What is the opinion? Where is the opinion? And then, oh, it's in the final sentence. That is not good enough. You shouldn't repeat the same points over and over again. This is a very obvious one, but it's something that people do. If you need to repeat an opinion, you should paraphrase it. It's okay to say your opinion in the introduction and then say your opinion again in the conclusion, but you shouldn't use the exact same words. You should paraphrase it. And you should also never write under 250 words. If you write under 250 words for task 2, you can't get above band 5. So let's look at a bad example. So the question at the top and what they have said at the bottom. So just read this and think about why it might be a bad example. Okay, so you probably noticed that there are 3 main ideas in this paragraph, but none of them are developed. None of them have explanations and none of them have examples. So the first one, music is enjoyable. How is it enjoyable? Can you give an example when someone has enjoyed music? Second point, people need to have lots of fun, and music and art allow them to do this. Why do they need to have lots of fun? Why is that important? Do you have an example? And the third point, drama is important for people who want a job as an actor. Do you have any examples of that? Do you have any famous actors or actresses that you could name? Why is drama important for someone who wants a job as an actor? This might seem obvious, but unless you write it, then the examiner can't give you any marks for it. So you must develop your ideas more. You'll also probably notice about this one is it talks about people. The question talks about students, primary school students, so young people below the age of 12 or below the age of 11. Because this person who wrote this paragraph just talks about people, they have talked generally about the topic. They have not answered the specific question. So they haven't developed their ideas, and their ideas are irrelevant. So they only get a band 5 for this paragraph. So let's look at a good example. Same question. So just read this and think about why is it a good example. So the main reason why it's a good example is because the idea is relevant and specific, and also the idea is well developed. So they have one main idea. The main idea is young learners. It helps young learners with their intellectual development. Intellectual development just means that it makes them more intelligent, it makes them smarter. So then they explain how music, art, and drama make students smarter. It has been shown that this can help a young brain develop and actually helps with subjects like maths and science. So music, art, and drama help the brain to understand and do maths and science better. So they haven't stopped there. They need to develop that main idea even more, and they've used a good example. It has been shown that children who study the piano are more likely to do well in mathematics. So this is a specific example about the piano and about mathematics. So this isn't a perfect answer, it's a real student answer, but for task response, it would get a very, very high mark. It would get an 8 or a 9. So now let's move on to our second marking criteria, coherence and cohesion. So what is this? This refers to your ability to write an essay that is clear and easy to understand. This is coherence. A coherent essay is very, very easy to understand. Logically organize information, so organize information in a logical way, a way that makes sense. This is cohesion. Link ideas, sentences, and paragraphs together. Again, this is cohesion. So let's look at what it looks like. You can pause the video and read this if you want, or a better way would be to listen to my do's and don'ts, and then you can go back and look at this later. So let's look at coherence and cohesion, do's and don'ts. Use my 4-paragraph structure. So for each of the 5 different question types, I have a 4-paragraph structure, and this will help you without even thinking about it with your coherence and cohesion. We're going to look at in later modules at the structures. Outline your main ideas and opinion in the introduction. This makes the essay very, very easy to understand. If you have your main ideas and your opinion in the introduction, the examiner knows exactly what the rest of the essay is about and will be able to link your ideas from the main body paragraphs to the introduction. So it will be very easy to understand. You must have clear topic sentences in your supporting paragraph. So a topic sentence is the very first sentence of your main body paragraph, your supporting paragraph, and it tells the examiner what the rest of your paragraph is about. And we'll be looking at that in more detail in later modules. Skip a line between paragraphs. This might sound very obvious, but lots of students don't do this, and it makes it very difficult to tell the difference between the paragraphs. So it's absolutely fine when you're writing in the exam just to skip a line between the introduction and the next paragraph, and then skip another line between the next paragraph, and then skip a line before the introduction or before the conclusion, sorry. Use cohesive devices appropriately and accurately. So cohesive devices are words like moreover, therefore, in conclusion, in my opinion, these fixed responses. It's a very misunderstood part of the IELTS exam. You actually don't get more marks for the more you use them. So you must use them appropriately, so at the right time, and you must use them accurately, so they have to be correct. So let's look at what you shouldn't do to get high marks in the coherence and cohesion. You shouldn't include a general background statement in the introduction. I don't know why students do this, but a lot of you do. You write a general statement that begins with nowadays or in modern life, and it's just a very general statement about the general topic. This doesn't add anything to your mark, and it is just a waste of time. Have lots of ideas in one paragraph. You shouldn't have 4, 5, 6 main ideas in one paragraph. If you do, None of them will be explained properly, none of them will be developed, and it is very confusing, and this lowers your marks for coherence. You must use cohesive devices at the start of every sentence. This is a big mistake. Do not begin every sentence with moreover, therefore, and words like this. If you do this, you will get a lower mark. Or use cohesive devices inaccurately. This is linked to the previous section. If you start every sentence with a cohesive device, I guarantee that most of them will be inaccurate. If you look at a Band 9 answer, they have very, very few cohesive devices at all. So let's look at an example. Music, art, and drama are important subjects. Moreover, they are enjoyable. Furthermore, people need to have lots of fun on music and art and allow them to do this. Additionally, art allows us to express ourselves. Last but not least, drama is important for people who want a job as an actor or actress. If you use these words in red, which are cohesive devices, again and again and again, and you use them at the beginning of every sentence, it demonstrates to the examiner one thing, that you don't have a very high level of English and you are not able to link sentences together without cohesive devices. So let's look at a good example. Same paragraph. Music, art, and drama allow students to express their creative side. It has been shown that this can help a young brain develop and actually helps with subjects like maths and science. For example, it has been shown that children who study the piano are more likely to do well in mathematics. So instead of having 1, 2, 3, 4, they only have this, which is a cohesive device, but it's a very simple cohesive device, and you will actually get more marks because good writers use simple cohesive devices rather than moreover and therefore, and they have used an appropriate one to give an example. Last but not least is not accurate because you're giving an example. Last but not least indicates that this is my last point that I am making. I'm not giving an example, I'm giving a main point. For example is more accurate because you are actually giving an example. So the main thing to learn from this is reduce the amount of cohesive devices you're using and only use them when absolutely necessary, and they must be appropriate. So vocabulary refers to your ability to express meaning both accurately and precisely, using words that are both appropriate and accurate. So it's very, very important, these words, appropriate and accurate. You shouldn't just use as many big fancy words as possible. You should only use words that are appropriate for that topic. And the words must also be accurate. You must use a range of vocabulary, and you must use topic-specific words accurately. So here is the official IELTS marking criteria for vocabulary. It's sometimes called lexical resource. So if you hear lexical resource, that just means vocabulary. So you can go back to this after you look at the do's and don'ts. Do's: be careful with spelling and grammar. If you use a word and the spelling is wrong and the grammar is wrong, you will actually get less marks, because it doesn't matter how big the word or fancy the word is, if it's spelt wrong and the grammar is wrong, you will get lower marks. Be aware of collocations. So collocations are words that go together naturally. For example, you would say, to describe your dinner, you would just say a delicious meal or a delicious dinner. To describe a woman, you might say a beautiful woman. To describe a man, you might say a handsome man, but you wouldn't say delicious man or delicious woman, or you wouldn't say a handsome dinner, because those words don't go together. So you should be aware of words that go together. The more words, collocations you use correctly, the higher that your vocabulary score will be. Use less common words. So less common words are linked to the next point, which is topic-specific words. Less common words does not mean very, very fancy, verbose use of words. It means using words that are specific to that topic. For example, if you were talking about a mobile phone, you might say that it was cutting edge technology or state of the art. You might describe the screen resolution. You might talk about megapixels for the camera. You might talk about the operating system. So operating system, screen resolution, megapixels, these are words specific to talking about mobile phones. So whenever you get a topic, you should think about the words that you would normally use to describe that topic. And that demonstrates to the examiner just how good your writing is or how good your vocabulary is. Follow the 100% rule. This is the best advice anyone can give you about vocabulary. Only use vocabulary that you are 100% sure about. 100% means that you know the meaning, you know the spelling, you know the synonyms, you know antonyms, you know the collocations, you know the grammar, you know everything about that word. You don't just learn lists of words and hope that you will be able to insert them into an essay. If you do that, you'll get the grammar wrong, you'll get the collocations wrong, you'll get the meaning wrong. It is better to use a word that is correct and is a simpler word than a very complicated word and to get it wrong. The more mistakes you make, the lower your marks will be for vocabulary. So let's look at vocabulary don'ts, things that you should not do. You shouldn't repeat the same words again and again. So you shouldn't repeat the exact same words over and over again. If you do, you are showing the examiner that you don't have a very wide vocabulary. Instead, you should use synonyms, or you should paraphrase, or you should use a different form of the word. So, for example, develop, developing, development are three different versions of the word develop. That's fine if you use a different form of the word. You shouldn't force complex words into your essay without knowing them 100%. This is the biggest reason why people get a 6 for vocabulary. They try to use words they don't know 100% and they make mistakes. If you make regular mistakes, you can't get above a 6. So it is better to use simpler words that are correct than complex words that are wrong. Use synonyms that are wrong. Lots of students try to use synonyms again and again and again because, as I said before, you shouldn't repeat words. However, if you are not sure about the synonyms, then you shouldn't use them. Just like complex words, synonyms that are wrong will lower your score. So if in doubt, it is better to repeat the word than to use synonyms. Sorry if that's a little bit confusing. Point 1, I said don't repeat the same words again. However, it is better to repeat the word than to use a synonym that is wrong. You should never learn lists of academic words out of context. Lots of students and lots of teachers give students lists of words to memorize. Learning words in a list is not the same as learning words in a book or listening to the words that someone says, because they're not in a full sentence, so they're not in context. Therefore, you should learn words in a book, or you should learn words from a podcast or on a radio show. Then you will know the meaning, you will know the grammar, you'll know the spelling, you'll know everything about that word. So let's look at a bad example. Research shows that children who play computer games are more likely to be myopics. Okay, so this person has learnt this word, myopics, but they don't know what it actually means. They don't know the correct form of the word. They don't know the correct spelling of the word. So they might insert this word myopics and think, oh, I've showed the examiner how great my vocabulary is. Only someone who has a very high level of vocabulary knows what this word myopics means and can use it in a sentence. It is wrong. You can't use it like this in a sentence. It would be much better if you just said bad eyesight. Okay? They think that myopics means bad eyesight. And actually, in this context, it does not. So it is much better to use a simple phrase like bad eyesight than use a very complex phrase, a very rare phrase like myopics, and hope to get a high score. So if in doubt, use a simple phrase that you know properly. So this refers to your ability to produce complex sentences, use a range of grammatical structures, produce error-free sentences. So this again is the official IELTS marking criteria for 6, 7, 8 and 9. You can have a look at this after, but let's go into the simpler do's and don'ts. So you should try to write as many error-free sentences as possible. This is the most important thing. If you more than 50% of your sentences, so more than half of your sentences, have any grammar errors in them, so even small punctuation errors, you can't get above a 6. To get a 7, 8 or a 9, half or more than half of your sentences must have no grammar errors at all. Therefore, you should focus on writing sentences that are error-free, have no errors. Use complex sentences. Complex sentences are not actually complex. Complex sentences are just sentences with more than one clause. So, for example, I am Irish, or I am from Ireland. One clause. My name is Chris. One clause. So those are two simple sentences, very short sentences. However, my name is Chris and I am from Ireland. That is two clauses. That is a complex sentence. So instead of using very, very short sentences with just one clause, you should try and use sentences with at least two clauses in them. However, you don't get more marks for having 4, 5, 6 clauses in one sentence. That's not the way it works. So it should be just use sentences that have more than one clause in them. Use a variety of structures. So don't just use, for example, the present simple in every single sentence. Use a variety of structures, and you will do that anyway, because you will have to give your opinion. That's one structure. Discuss other people's opinion. That's another structure. Give an example. That's another structure. Explain what something means. That's another structure. Summarize everything at the end. That's a final structure. So that's a variety of structures. So if you follow my lessons, if you follow the way that I write my essays, you will be able to use a variety of structures anyway. So you won't have to worry about this so much. Check work when writing and at the end. After you write each sentence, you should go back and read that sentence. Don't leave it until the end to check everything. If you leave everything to the end, there will be too many mistakes and you won't have time. It is much better that after you write one sentence, go back, read it, check it, correct any mistakes, and then do the same at the end. Read your whole essay again. It should only take you 4 or 5 minutes, even less, to do that, and you'll be able to spot any mistakes, any small grammar mistakes, and correct them. Follow the 100% rule. So just like vocabulary, same for grammar. Unless you are completely 100% sure about a structure or about a tense, you shouldn't use it. You shouldn't try to use the future progressive tense if you have never used it before, or you have very little experience of using it before. You don't have to use every single tense in the English language. You don't have to use very, very complex language. Like I said before, complex sentences just mean more than one clause, which is very simple. So follow the 100% rule for grammar. Don't try and use as many different structures as possible. Lots of teachers tell their students, you need to use a wide variety of structures. Therefore, students go into the exam thinking just about grammar structures. That is not how a good essay is done. You should be thinking about how to answer the question, thinking about your ideas, thinking about your vocabulary, thinking about your overall structure, not thinking about, I need to write 7 or 8 different types of structures. If you follow my, I'm going to give you sentence by sentence structures in the rest of the lessons. If you follow them, you will have used a wide variety of structures anyway, so you won't have to worry about this. So don't think structures first. Try to impress the examiner with complex grammar. Linked to the first question, If you go into the exam thinking grammar first, just thinking about your grammar, then you won't answer the question. So complex structures will look after themselves. You will write them anyway. You don't have to think about them. Write sentences that stop meaning being conveyed. This is the thing that will get you a band 4 or a band 5. If the examiner cannot understand your sentence at all, that means that the meaning can't come through. They don't understand the meaning of the sentence. Therefore, you will get a 4 or a 5 for grammar. So if you try and use very, very complex language, very, very complex grammar, and it stops the examiner knowing what you were trying to say, you'll get a 4 or a 5. So there's a difference between small mistakes and big mistakes. Big mistakes stop meaning being conveyed. Small mistakes can be forgiven because you still understand. So vocabulary and grammar. Remember that it is a writing test, not a grammar and vocabulary test for both of these. You shouldn't think grammar and vocabulary first. You should be thinking about answering the question first. Students who focus on answering the question will get higher marks for grammar and vocabulary anyway. Trust me. The goal of writing is to convey your meaning clearly, not list long, complicated words and phrases. So the reason why people write an essay, or the reason why people write a letter or a text message or anything, is to tell someone what they think, to convey meaning. Not to show off your grammar, not to show off your vocabulary. I know it is a test and you want to show the examiner how good your vocabulary is and how good your grammar is, but your number one thing should be clarity. Clarity is king. Clarity means that it is easy to understand. I had one student recently who did the test 7 times and got 6 or 6.5 7 times in a row. And then he showed me his writing and I told him, stop using such complex grammar. Stop using complex words. Just focus on writing a very clear essay. And he sent me a lovely email the other day and he got an 8 for writing task 2 for the first time ever. Just by following this one rule. Clarity is king. So let's look at a very bad example for vocabulary and grammar. Firstly, one of the major concerns is older generations having to face a lot of challenges than the younger ones in order to execute the same type of work. For example, many multinational companies look forward their employees' age, appearance, and smartness regardless of their experiences. This is definitely negatively reflect the 30 plus or 40 plus job aspirants. In such cases, people are being hired more than the older ones. Now this is from a real student exam. I've taken this paragraph from a student, and this student told me that their grammar was very high level and their vocabulary was very high level, and they couldn't understand why they were getting only a 5 or only a 6. Because they were trying to use grammar structures and words that they weren't 100% sure about, means that they had lots and lots of mistakes. That means that the coherence, easy to understand level of their paragraph was very, very low. And they also didn't answer the question because it's impossible for the examiner to know if you are answering the question or not, because they can't answer the question. So this paragraph would get a 5 for grammar, a 5 for vocabulary, and a 5 for coherence, and a 5 for task response, because you just can't tell what the person is doing. Now, I got this person to write out in simple language, the exact same paragraph in simple language. And this is what they did. Increased competition from today's youth has left many over 50s in poverty. If a young and an old person apply for the same job, it is often the case that the younger individual will have more qualifications and may also be willing to work for less money, leaving many seniors without work and left on the scrap heap. For example, a recent survey showed that since the financial crisis in 2008, fuel and food poverty has increased by 82% amongst the ages. So let's look at the vocabulary in this one. Young and old person, same job, qualifications, work for less money, seniors without work, poverty has increased. Now, none of these are very, very complex language, but they are topic specific. They are very specific to this topic that they are talking about, which means that they get high marks for vocabulary. But most importantly, the vocabulary is correct. There is no mistakes. Also, the grammar structures are simple, but they are correct. And there is also a variety of structures. So even though that the grammar is simple, it is correct. There is a variety, and the sentences are complex. So this is an excellent, this is a huge improvement for this student to go from this, which doesn't mean anything, band 5, to this, which is clear, easy to understand, and there are no mistakes. And this student would get at least an 8 for this. So let's review what we did in this module. We learned about the 4 marking criteria that examiners use to mark your task 2 answer. We found out exactly what you need to do and what you shouldn't do to get a band 7, 8 or 9 for all 4 criteria. And we looked at good and bad examples. So this was a very, very important module. If you didn't get everything, feel free to go back, look at the examples again, anything you didn't understand, and go through it again. It might take 2 times to understand everything. So in the next module, we're going to learn how to finish on time, something very, very important to work on our time management. We're also going to learn how to think of ideas quickly and easily. I have 5 different idea generation techniques that I'm going to show you. We're going to learn how to plan our answers, extremely important. And we're going to learn how to reduce the amount of grammar and vocabulary mistakes. So thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next module. Goodbye.